All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming to our panel discussion on the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. It should be an interesting discussion. There's lots to say. I think that most of us know that on November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy went to Dallas, Texas on a political trip. He was kind of gearing up for the campaign of 1964, where he was running for re-election. And unfortunately, he will be murdered at Dealey Plaza. So if you've ever been to Dallas, been by Dealey Plaza, there's a whole museum. One of our panelists is going to talk about that. But from there, it gets dicey because there are multiple ideas and theories about what really happened on that day in 1963. So I'm going to let our panelists, our wonderful panelists, we have Leigh-Anne Regenold, who teaches government here, Cheryl.
Thank you to all my students who all get A's. Yeah.
But you have to clap for every panelist. Cheryl North, who teaches sociology, and James Hathcock, who teaches history.
Hello.
And my name is Sara Reed. I don't know if I introduced myself. Sorry. Oh, thank you.
She teaches history as well.
I do.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get started. So my first question is for Leigh-Anne. And if you could please talk briefly about the 1960 presidential election. What were JFK's platform issues, and what role did the media play in that campaign?
The 1960 presidential election was one of the closest in history, and most of us don't think about it that way. We might think that Kennedy wins by a landslide. He's so popular and revered and mythologized in presidential history and lore. But I pulled up actually the data on the election. Kennedy wins with 49.7% of the popular vote, so not half, although quite frankly most presidents since Kennedy, very few win with more than half. Because of third-party candidates, that's a whole other discussion. Nixon gets 49.5%. The difference in the popular vote, which I will tell my students never, ever, ever matters, but technically about who's president, but it does matter when you think about presidents coming into office and having what we call a mandate. How much public support does a president have is kind of tied to that popular vote number. Kennedy wins the election with less than 120,000 people across the country. It is literally one of the closest presidential elections in history. And that is important because Kennedy knows how close his election is. He knows when he's president how razor thin that election is, and he's facing the concept of the Southern conservative Democrats. He can't win without them. And he knows that. And that is in his forefront when he's running in 1960. His platform issues are almost exclusively foreign policy. He serves in both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. He actually hated Congress. He hated his time in Congress. He didn't like the power struggle in Congress. He didn't like the pomp and circumstance of the Senate. He felt like it took way too long to get things done. And so, understandably, when he becomes president, he focuses on the area that presidents have almost unilateral power and control, and that is foreign affairs. Anything domestically the presidents want to get done, they have to go through Congress, right? Congress is the primary component for laws and domestic policy and those kind of things, but especially in 1960, Congress had almost no power or authority over what they were doing, right? Foreign affairs. This is the height of the Cold War, right? He sees the spread of communism and the proliferation of nuclear weapons as the biggest threat to the United States and to the world. His inaugural address in 1960 is 16 minutes long. That's kind of a short one, right? Politicians can get quite windy when they have a captive audience, like in an inauguration. And in that inaugural speech, he not once mentions domestic policy at all. He is almost exclusively focused on foreign policy. I pulled the 1960 Democratic Party's platform. What are the issues that the party wants to see enacted? Not just the presidency, but the party as a whole wants to see enacted during the next 4 years. I Googled, I did a find, right? I took the document down and said, look, right, how many times do they mention equal rights? 0. How many times do they mention civil rights? 0. How many times do they mention the word equality? Once. One line in the 1960 Democratic platform says equality in the one-line component on women's rights, women's equality. We would like women to be equal and have equal pay. That's it. In comparison, the conversation about farming is 2.5 pages long. On small business, it's a page. Almost, right? The first, and we don't even get to that message until the 22nd page, right? The first 13 pages are almost exclusively about foreign affairs. So it isn't just Kennedy that's wanting to focus on foreign affairs. This is a world, a national thing, right? We're much more concerned about being blown to bits by the Russians, right? By the Soviets, and the proliferation and spread of communism and the threat of nuclear weapons. So that is understandably Kennedy's focus, right? He doesn't start to pay attention to other issues until much later in his presidency. So the role of media. Kennedy and Nixon engage in the first televised presidential debate, not the first televised political debate. Most people might not know that the first televised political debate was between two women. Eleanor Roosevelt and Margaret Chase, I can't think of her, right?
Of course,
Smith Chase, yes,
Roosevelt.
right? And they engaged in a policy discussion, kind of on behalf of male counterparts in their parties, but this was certainly the most first presidential televised debate. People listened to the debate on the radio, right? I even remember my grandparents talking about listening to the debate on the radio. And if you listened to the debate on the radio, you were more likely to think that Nixon won the debate or did better. But if you watched it on television, you thought Kennedy did. Part of that was that Kennedy was younger, charismatic, good-looking, right? He also wasn't afraid to wear makeup. That was very anti-masculine in 1960. He understood how to run for president. He didn't necessarily understand how to be president, but he knew how to run for president, and he knew his image was really important. And Nixon had the flu. He wouldn't wear makeup. He felt awful, so he was very uncomfortable in front of the television cameras. It was a new media, relatively, and so he didn't do so well there. So that kind of sets the stage for what Kennedy comes into, right? When he wins the presidency by one of the narrowest margins, right? We often think that the 2000 election between Gore and Bush is so close. That election was incredibly close. Has similar percentages, but that one is actually more than 500,000 votes different, where 120 votes is just the most razors of thin. Keep in mind that the Kennedy-Johnson ticket wins Texas with 1.14 million more votes than the Republicans did at that time. Right, kind of keep that. Okay, that's enough.
And Johnson was from Texas.
And Johnson was from Texas. He was picked specifically because he was a Southern Democrat, and they could carry the biggest Southern state electorally, right? And they did. And Kennedy could not have won the election without the Southern conservative Democrats.
And that's a wonderful segue into my next question, which is for James. Why was President Kennedy in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963?
Yeah, it really was about shoring up support for that 1964 campaign. He went to Houston and San Antonio before he came here. He was actually in Fort Worth the day before he came to Dallas. That next morning, they took Air Force One from Fort Worth to Dallas. I don't know why they had to fly an airplane to go from Fort Worth to Dallas.
From Meacham to Love.
6 minutes.
Yeah,
Meacham to Love, yeah.
I know traffic's bad, but it's not that bad. Yeah. So yeah, he was here to talk to. He was going to have a lunch at the local Trade Mart down in Dallas, Texas, and it really is about trying to shore up that conservative base that we're talking about, those very conservative Southern Democrats at the time. If I remember right, it was one of those deals where you had to, like people could pay to have lunch with the President of the United States. It's one of those things where you pay way too much money for really bad chicken, but you can say, I sat in the same room as the president, right? You can tell your buddies I had lunch with the president of the United States. So it was one of those kind of things that brought him here to Dallas.
And it was important that he come. I mean, there were flyers, if you want to talk about the flyers.
No, you can go ahead. I know what you're talking about.
Circulating in Texas with Kennedy's name on them, and the caption was, "Wanted for treason."
Yeah.
So when we're talking about Kennedy coming to Texas, that was important. He really felt like he needed to carry that state by as much or bigger a margin in order to win re-election in 1964.
Yeah, when you take second half American history with either of us, you talk about how the Democratic Party was the conservative party back then. I know things have changed now where it's the Republican Party that sort of represents the conservatives of the United States, but there was a lot of transformation happening in 1960s politics, going from Democrats being conservative more into what they are today. And Texas was kind of a hotbed of that at the time. It really was. Yeah.
So my next question, going to get into the meat of the issue. Talk about the JFK assassination. Who was Lee Harvey Oswald, and what was the conclusion of the Warren report, including that very famous or infamous, single bullet theory?
All right. Okay, so President Kennedy lands in Dallas-Fort Worth, gets off of Air Force One. The motorcade, he wanted the motorcade top to be taken off that day. He said it was a nice day weather-wise. So they took what they called the bubble top off of the car. It's making its way through Dealey Plaza. I've passed by that thing 1,000 times. My grandparents, they live in Oak Cliff, or they did. They've passed away. But I drive by that all the time going down to Oak Cliff. But it takes that turn on Elm. The school book depository is kind of on the corner. The car makes that turn. It's going towards a triple underpass. When people who were there hear these shots ring out, it kind of depends on where you were that day. There were people who say that they heard shots coming from what's called the grassy knoll, which would have been in front of the president's motorcade. There were others who were there who said that they heard it coming from up in the windows of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. So you have conflicting reports on where the shots may or may not have come from. Once the shots were fired, you had a mass of people running towards the grassy knoll area. And the Warren report said this. The Warren report said that people were running towards the grassy knoll because they were trying to get away. Like they were running from the scene. Those people said, no, we were running that way because we were looking for who did the shooting. Like we were trying to find out, where the shots were coming from and who had fired those shots. So that's kind of sneaky of the Warren report to put that in, that they were running from the scene. No, actually they were running where they thought the shots had been fired. But others, there was a guy named Hugh Ainsworth. He was a journalist at the time. He was working for a local Dallas newspaper. We actually had him here on our campus 10 years ago for you remember that? The 50th anniversary, yeah. And Hugh Ainsworth wasn't buying any of the conspiracy theories. He really believed it was Oswald acting alone. But Hugh Ainsworth was there. He was actually right near the Texas School Book Depository. He was down below. And he said that when it rang out, his first inclination was like a car's, what do you call it, the exhaust pipe had backfired or something. But then when he heard another shot, he realized, oh my God, someone's shooting at the president. He swore that he heard it coming from above and to his back, which would be the window right at the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. So I don't know. It's really strange. It really kind of depends on where you were that day as to where you felt that shots were coming from. But anyways, as the car is coming around, going towards the triple underpass, President Kennedy is shot in the throat. now, and Cheryl and I were talking about this before this started. Just a couple of days ago, some doctors who were there at Parkland Hospital, they've come out with a new documentary. Was it released yesterday?
Yesterday.
I want to say, yeah, just yesterday. And these doctors these are trained pathologists. These are people who deal with gunshot wounds all the time. They're experts in their field. They swore that the president's shot to the throat was a front entry wound, that it came from the front of the motorcade. That's not consistent with right from the school book depository coming down from the back, that it came from the front and then it was an entry wound. But he's shot in the throat. Is that from the back or from the front? I'll leave that for you to decide. But he was shot in the throat. And of course, there's also the fatal shot to the head, right? How many of you have seen the Zapruder film? Okay, there's a few of you in the room. If you watch the Zapruder film, what you see is the president, like you can see him like literally like this, right? Like he's holding his throat, which is kind of consistent for an entry wound, I would think. If you got hit back here first, I think you'd be doing like this because it hurt back there first. But he's doing like this, he's holding his throat, and then it gets to that point and there's this, like just this explosion. It's a god-awful thing to watch, it really is. As like just the president's head just explodes. And he's kind of thrown back into the left.
Abraham Zapruder, if you don't know, was just a regular guy.
Yeah, just a
business owner in Dallas, shows up, wants to film the president, and happens to be standing right where President Kennedy was shot and killed.
It's just like you in a crowd with your cell phone. Yeah. He just has a video camera and he's filming the president like you would do if you were to see the president. Oh, I want to catch this on tape, right? That's what the president, that's right.
He couldn't have had a better angle. Seriously, he was in the perfect spot. Yeah, and captured it all. And it's kind of the famous footage of, the assassination attempt. But then you have other problems that day where, okay, so the single bullet there, I guess I can jump on into that as, we're kind of talking about the shots being fired. So the Warren Commission, it's named after Chief Justice Earl Warren. Literally a week after the assassination, President Johnson, he was Kennedy's vice president who took over. Literally a week later, the country wanted answers, right? Like what happened that day? Who killed Kennedy? Was it really this Oswald guy? A lot of things weren't adding up for the country. So President Johnson asked Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice actually, Earl Warren, to put together this commission to look into the assassination of the president. Future President Gerald Ford served on the Warren Commission as well. And so I feel like what the Warren Commission really was trying to do was settle the country down. Just kind of ease fears that might be out there that this was more than just a lone gunman, that like there's a plot afoot. The Cubans could be involved, the Russians, who knows, right? I don't want to go down conspiracy theory road just yet. We'll get there in a little bit.
We will.
Yeah, we will. We'll put on our tinfoil hats here in just a little bit. But, okay, so they're trying to ease the fears of the country. And I feel like the Warren Commission already had its verdict. Yeah. Like Lee Harvey Oswald is the lone assassin. And what they're trying to do is put together their evidence to prove their preconceived. He did it. He was alone.
Which you should never do. But
no, you should never do that.
Totally violates scientific method.
Yes, it absolutely does. So with that in mind, right, they've got their verdict. They just have to have it proved. They have this weird thing called the single or magic bullet theory, where you've got this one bullet, which, by the way, after it's been shot out of a rifle, it's in pristine condition when they find it afterwards. Growing up, my father was a hunter. I sometimes went hunting with him. It's too expensive. I can't do it. I got kids. I got a mortgage. I can't pay that. But I've seen bullets after they've been fired just into cans, into, just targets and things like that. They're not pristine. Okay, they're all kinds of beat up and they're pieces and things like that. There's no way that this one bullet could have hit the way it did and end up in pristine condition on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital. Okay, but anyway, so they've got this bullet. It's going through the president's neck, comes out. Then at that point, which way does it go? I don't remember. I think it goes...
Doesn't it go?
Twists left.
Yeah.
Twists left.
Doesn't it go back into
it completely defies the laws of physics, by the way. Bullets go straight, right? They don't make right and left-hand turns. So it's going left. hitting the president again. Then it goes forward and hits Governor Conley. The governor of our state of Texas was in the front seat behind, or in front of President Kennedy. He gets hit in the wrist. He got hit in the back as well. So
One bullet.
by one bullet,
Does all of it.
it goes through the president, left, forward, Connolly, right, ends up hitting his wrist, and ends up in pristine condition, like mint condition. And they sold that to the American people as
did they?
that one bullet. That one bullet was responsible for all those many wounds that President Kennedy and Governor Connolly had both had. There's also the problem of there was a man by the name of James Tate. He was there. He was just simply an observer. He was standing near the triple underpass, and he was hit by a fragment of a bullet as well. So if you account for James Tate's getting hit by a bullet fragment, there's more shots being fired than the Warren Commission wants to tell the American people. Again, I think they had their verdict. They just had to get their evidence to support their verdict, if you will. And I think there are variables they couldn't control, like James Tate getting hit with a bullet fragment, the lone bullet not really holding up under a court of law, I don't think anyways. So, yeah, I guess, did I answer the question?
You did.
Yeah, that's the assassination, that's the lone bullet
You're
theory.
good.
Yeah.
Strange credulity.
Yes.
I always tell my students this. I don't know if there was a conspiracy. I know there are so many things that stink about that day. There are so many things that just don't add up. I don't know what that answers, but I just know that a lot of things don't add up that day. At least what the Warren Commission and the United States government told the people, it doesn't really fly. It doesn't add up.
And there is a new book that came out a month ago? A month ago from a Secret Service agent who was there on the scenes, who just remembered after 60 years that it was he who picked up the bullet that was the pristine bullet that was laying in the car that Kennedy had just been taken out of to go into Parkland Hospital. And he decided the best course of action would be to lay it on a stretcher because that's great when it comes to chain of evidence, right?
Right, not turn it over to somebody.
Yeah.
And then has become a hermit for the last 60 years
Yeah.
and had, no
Said he had no
thought
idea.
Well, he had to sell
to
a book.
talk about this with anyone. He had PTSD and
He had to sell a book.
Yeah. But all of a sudden, no.
Something like that. All right, Cheryl, what has been the effect of the assassination on the city of Dallas, and how does collective memory apply when talking about the Kennedy assassination?
So it's interesting because initially the shooting in Dallas caused sort of this sense of collective guilt, maybe collective responsibility among the Dallasites about, this is the place where Kennedy was shot. And you see that a lot of times where some trauma happens or something tragic happens. People talk about that happening around places where there were concentration camps during the Holocaust or whatever. And it's this idea of that we're collectively responsible as a community, even though maybe individuals had nothing to do with it. You hear quotes from that time about city officials talking about Dallas used to be seen as the wild, wild west, and it was bold and innovative and like a really new up-and-coming city as far as kind of a power wielder in the U.S. And then after the shooting, it kind of felt more like it was apologetic and less confident, right? Like they had to make up for something. For example, when there was talk about putting together the sixth floor museum, a lot of people in Dallas were really, really against it. A lot of famous Dallasites, Tom Landry, famous football coach for the Dallas Cowboys, Mary Kay Ash from Mary Kay Cosmetics, they were very vocal against the sixth floor museum. They thought it would be dragging out Dallas's shame in front of the whole nation. There were several arson attempts on the building to prevent it from happening. And so that sense of collective guilt was real in the city of Dallas, and it really kind of affected the tone of people from the city. But as time goes on, the narrative changes, and we have all the pop culture images kind of around the assassination. If you think about it, if somebody says JFK assassination to you guys, what you have is the images that have been passed down generation to generation. So I would bet in your head, when we talk about this, do you guys see something about the old 60s video footage of people lined up for the parades? And here's a lady in her pillbox hat holding the hand of her little kid, right? We think about the images of chaos breaking out as the shots happen. Do we all see that image of Jackie Kennedy climbing over the back of the car?
Yeah.
In
Right.
the pink Chanel suit.
In the pink Chanel suit,
Yeah.
yes. The images maybe of Oswald being gunned down as he's being escorted by the police. And so it takes on kind of a thing of legend or of storytelling as the narrative goes on. The Sixth Floor Museum is a good example of that because they originally, it focused on what they call the rememberers, people who were actually on the scene, and the museum would like interview those people and they would tell their stories and maybe have photos from their cameras. But as time goes on, the museum took on kind of the narrative, the pop culture narrative, right? And it relies heavily on models and reenactments and photos, and even kind of more recently virtual reality, where you can put on a headset and you're standing in the window in the book repository, so that now it kind of feels a lot like a movie set when you go, right? Instead of necessarily strictly history, it kind of takes on that very pop culture movie set feel.
Interesting. What role has the media played in the depiction of the JFK assassination?
So it's huge. Books, movies, folk songs started up right almost immediately. If you think about it, this is the first assassination to take place during the TV age, maybe the first murder to occur on live TV. And it hadn't slowed down. Like James said, a brand new documentary just came out yesterday. There are all kinds of nods to the assassination in pop culture that we may not even realize that's what they're referencing. Like, it's widely thought that the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise is called that as a nod to the assassination because Elm Street was the actual street where the assassination happened. I think a lot of times we're not aware of that. Books, movies, videos. There was, now virtual reality, and the assassination has even been gamified in the early 2000s. Didn't y'all know about this? There was a game that came out called JFK Reloaded. Do you guys know about that? Where the player was actually Oswald. Like, you take on the role of Oswald, and you get points and high scores for the most accurate fatal shot. So it's like glorifying the assassination of the, and as you can imagine, there was a lot of public pushback about that, right? The public was not behind that. They tried to justify it by saying, it's giving people allegiance to kind of take control over a traumatic situation, which is not what that was, right? You're basically playing an assassin, and a real historic assassin on a tragic event that happened in this country. A lot of the media depictions focus on conspiracy theories, like we were talking about, and that hadn't slowed down. There's kind of either new conspiracy theories or new people kind of giving credence and backing to the conspiracy theories that we've already talked about. And so when you think about that, media depictions both reflect on the event, and they allow us maybe to grieve or to get closure, but they also kind of shape the events, right? They drive how we view what's going on. Like, for example, the famous JFK film, Oliver Stone's film that was released in 1991. It had it really resonated with the public. It had 8 Oscar nominations, and it's seen in a big way as kind of giving closure to Dallas and helping the city of Dallas get over that collective shame. Because in essence, what it did is it rallied people around the idea that, there's somebody else to blame, not Dallas, right? This was this big undercover plot. And, forces bigger than the community of Dallas were behind this assassination. And so a large way that allowed Dallas to kind of get past it as a city or as a community. In addition to that, there are events in our history that are seen as kind of before and after timeline events. Like, you hear people talking about the U.S. before 9/11 and post 9/11. right? Or maybe before the moon landing and after the moon landing. And the JFK assassination has taken on that same kind of connotation, right? Where people view pre-assassination as the good old days, kind of nostalgia for the wholesome America.
Camelot.
Exactly. Yeah, Camelot's a good example of that.
The Kennedy administration was called Camelot.
Camelot as this nostalgic perfection, sort of. And post-assassination and, the kind of chaos and the trauma that came after that, you had the Robert Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King, Watergate, not too far after that. And so it's kind of seen as a timeline where before we were bonded, things were pure and wholesome, and we were rallied around maybe a common enemy that was a foreign enemy, right? Post the assassination and the events that followed, it's seen as a period of disillusionment where maybe our own government is even lying to us about things, right? I was going to show you guys a video. Do y'all know who Don Henley is?
The Eagles?
There's like two people that are like, yeah, y'all know who the Eagles are? Thank you back there, guys.
Yes.
Don Henley was the lead singer of the Eagles and
From
eventually,
Texas.
eventually
Went to UNT.
successful solo artist. He went to UT?
UNT.
Oh, UNT, I didn't know that.
Go Mean Green.
So he had a song as a solo artist called End of the Innocence, and it sort of parallels a personal coming of age where you are nostalgic for your childhood innocence and as you grow into adulthood, and it parallels that personal perspective with one of the country, talking about this before and after idea of kind of the trustworthiness of citizens in government. And it looks at nostalgia, old days sort of footage. But part of the video is shot in the Texas Theater where Oswald was arrested. And it was so important to Henley to make sure people were putting that connection together, and he really wanted to use the Texas Theater for his video to kind of drive that point home. That during the time when he was filming the video, there was a move to tear down the Texas Theater and demolish it, and the Dallas Historic Commission wanted to purchase it and buy it, and they didn't have the money to do it. So it was so important to Henley that he actually paid the down payment for them to purchase that so that he could film his video. When you watch the video, you can see those shots from the Texas Theater. So that's just kind of an example of how, even though maybe we don't consciously realize that sort of before and after timeline, the pop culture that's kind of grown up around this, I think we all a little bit have that feeling about it.
I think to kind of add on to that, there's events in generations that kind of mark you, and you're like, I remember when, right? I know exactly what I did when. For our generation, probably, it's 9/11. I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing the entire day on 9/11. My grandmother had just died.
Yes.
I mean, I remember the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
My mom, who was a teenager when Kennedy was assassinated, remembers exactly what she was doing when Kennedy was assassinated, was watching the TV when Jack Ruby kills Lee Harvey Oswald in the parking garage in Dallas. And so for young people, right, kind of coming of age at this time, this is the moment, right, kind of that defining moment of before and after, right? Kind of, I know what was happening and things changed since then, right? We are kind of in 9/11, same thing. Things changed. How we behaved around each other, right, and how we viewed the world around us changed, much like the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
So Cheryl, you mentioned the Texas Theater where Lee Harvey Oswald was apprehended. James, could you tell us more about how he was apprehended and his own assassination?
Yeah, no problem. So Oswald was at the Texas School Book Depository that day. There's no doubt of that. There were people who saw him coming down the steps after the shots had been fired. Now, whether or not that's a whole other thing. But there were people who saw him coming down the steps. These people testified that he was calm, collected. He, in no way, shape, or form, looked out of sorts, nervous, terrified. He just very calmly walked down. Once he reached the street level, he makes his way back to an apartment that he had there in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas. After leaving his apartment, this is where Officer Tippett is shot. A Dallas police officer was shot. Most people do believe that it was Lee Harvey Oswald who shot the Dallas police officer. Perhaps the officer was stopping him, asking him questions. Maybe he fit the description of what they were looking for, as far as someone who had assassinated the president. We're not quite sure, but Officer Tippett did stop him, did question him. There was a lady, I forget her name. She was sitting on her front porch, and she watched all of this unfold. She heard shots fired, and she watched as Officer Tippett went down, and Lee Harvey Oswald went, or a man who looked like Lee Harvey Oswald went running in the other direction. So he takes off to downtown Oak Cliff and goes to the Texas Theater, which I've actually been to before. I don't know if it's still the same way, but the seat that he was sitting in when he was arrested forever, it was marked in a different color than all the other chairs that were there in that theater. Yeah, like I said, my grandmom and granddad grew up in that area, so. But okay, so he's walking down this street. He's going towards the Texas Theater. There's a guy who owned a shoe store. It was right across the street from the Texas Theater. He watched as he put it, this strange man walked over to the theater. There wasn't really a movie starting at that moment, so there wasn't a line of people to buy tickets, right? It was just middle of the day. This guy walks over to the theater, doesn't stop to pay for a ticket. He just goes into the theater without paying for a ticket. And the gentleman said that's why he notified the authorities, because, this guy walked in without paying for his ticket. So Oswald's sitting in the theater. He's watching it was a Western. I don't remember the name of the movie. It's irrelevant. But when the police show up, so all the police know is a man walked into the theater without paying for admission, right? That's all the police know. And it's like the entire Dallas Police Department descends upon the Texas Theater. You've got dozens of officers charging into that room. They stop the film, a police officer standing at the front of the theater, asking if people will just stay calm as they're kind of looking through. They get close to Oswald, and Oswald realizes the game's up. He stands up and he punches a police officer in the face. He's tackled to the ground. He starts screaming about how he's not resisting arrest, but they put the cuffs on him and bring him out. I just find it fascinating, though, that you're showing up to a Texas theater to look into someone not paying for a ticket, and dozens of Dallas police officers are there to arrest this guy, right? I guess just didn't pay for his ticket. So that's how he's apprehended. That's how they get him down to the police department. Once he's in custody, there are a lot of threats against his life. You can imagine, right? I mean, the President of the United States is dead. There are a lot of people in the country who want Oswald dead. They just believe that he's the lone gunman. They believe that he pulled the trigger. So the Dallas Police Department is getting call after call after call of threats against Oswald's life. They actually held an interview. They allowed him to talk to the press for a little bit. That's the famous scene where he says, "I'm nothing but a patsy," or, "I'm just a patsy." In other words, I didn't do this. He felt like he was being framed. He was a patsy, as he called it. So with those death threats, they really felt the need to get him out of there and move him to a more secure location, which is fine. That happens all the time with people who have been incarcerated. You can move them to another location. But this is the would-be assassin of the President of the United States, right? So in the basement of the Dallas Police Department, the media have gathered. They're there to get the shot of Oswald coming out, being put into the car, and taken off to the secure location. We'll enter into the story a strange fellow by the name of Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was a nightclub owner in Dallas, Texas. He owned a couple of clubs. That's being nice. What he owned were strip clubs. Let's just be honest and call them what they were. One was called the Carousel Club, if I remember right. So Jack Ruby, I don't know, he said that he felt sorry for Jackie Kennedy. He said that he didn't want her to have to go through the trauma of a trial if one was to come, that she might have to relive the whole experience. I've always said it's one of the dumbest reasons for shooting someone, so that the wife doesn't have to go through the turmoil of a trial. But anyway, Jack Ruby, that morning, we know for a fact, he went to a Wells Fargo, and he wired some money to one of the ladies that worked at his club. We have that time stamped. There is a Wells Fargo receipt that shows, yes, Jack Ruby at this time sent this money to this lady. Shortly after sending that, wiring that money at Wells Fargo, he walks across the street. He walks over to the Dallas Police Department, and somehow, some way, this guy gets into the basement of the Dallas Police Department on a day when you know for a fact you're moving a high-level incarcerated individual. that people have been making death threats against from the moment he was arrested, right? That door was unlocked. And there are so many questions there. Why is that door unlocked? Why is that man able to walk up to the basement of the Dallas Police Department, turn a knob, walk into a door, when you know for a fact that people want this man dead, right? Again, I don't want to go down conspiracy theory road. I don't want to put on a tinfoil hat, but it does not make any sense at all that door is unlocked.
Right next to conspiracy.
Right, yeah. I'm getting close. I want to get back on the highway. I want to get off that. Okay, I want to come back to the middle and say.
That's the next question, right?
I know it is. Okay, so then Oswald walks up. There are police everywhere. There are media people everywhere. And this strange little dude is walking to the front. He has no press credential. He has no reason to be in that room. Not a single police officer is asking him any questions about who are you, why are you here, you're not credentialed, what are you doing in this room? Walks right up to the front. Oswald comes, I mean, you couldn't time it any more perfectly. Oswald walks out. There's that famous, you got the guy with the cowboy hat on, the Dallas police officer, and he's in a white suit, and he's got that look on his face. But yeah, Jack Ruby just lunges forward with a pistol. By the way, he's got a pistol in his jacket in the middle of the Dallas Police Department. He pulls out a pistol and screams Oswald and fires a shot right into the abdomen. And it's a fatal shot. It went through like his liver, other parts of his organs down there. So instead of putting him into a Dallas police car, he's immediately put into an ambulance, rushed off to Parkland Hospital. And I was telling Cheryl this right before we started all this. I don't know why I've always found this story fascinating. It's just always stuck with me as a little nugget in my head. But there was a nurse who was there at Parkland Hospital that day. And as Oswald was being brought in, like she was there when Kennedy was brought in. And Kennedy was in this room. That's where he passed away. And she said that as Oswald was being brought in, she realized they were about to take him to the same room where President Kennedy had passed away. And she said that it just didn't feel right to her. So she's told him, no, stop, he's not going there. He's going over here. So she made them like reroute him to another room. Again, I don't know what that matters or what it's worth. It's just, I don't know, a little story I've always found fascinating about that day. Yeah, Oswald does pass away because of Ruby's shot. And again, Ruby later, when asked why he did it, he said he wanted to spare Jackie Kennedy, President Kennedy's wife. He wanted to spare her the trouble of having to relive all this through a trial that might happen someday. But most people who you know, or who I know who are alive at that time, they don't really remember the killing of President Kennedy, because that like happened in the middle of the day. It wasn't live on television. You know what I'm saying?
Sunday morning.
Yeah. So like, it was during school. My mom said that like what she remembered was they were all taken into the gym. They put it on the PA for the school, the radio, and like teachers were crying. My dad said the same thing. Like they got let out early that day. But what a lot of people remember, and you hit on this earlier, is that moment where Jack Ruby on live television, like this is unfiltered television that everybody in America could see.
Sunday morning.
Yeah, my father was eating breakfast. He said my grandmother had just given him breakfast, and he was sitting there in front of the television watching it, and he said just Jack Ruby jumps forward, shots fired, pandemonium. Like that's what he remembered the most for the rest of his life, was like he saw a man killed live on television, unfiltered, right, just the way it happened, like that. And that's, that's the thing that most people remember from that day. But a thing that's always stuck with me as well, uncles have told me this, grandfathers have told me this, it all comes back to this one point. It's just a shame that Oswald was never put on trial. Like, he should have taken the witness stand. He should have been asked questions. And I feel like he had a story to tell. I feel like he had some information that he wanted to give. But we'll never know because he's taken out by Jack Ruby, right? So that's, I think, the craziest thing of it all. I think so many questions would be answered. I think so many conspiracy theories would just go away if Oswald could have had that trial, been cross-examined, and been given the moment to, I don't know, tell his side of the story, maybe prove that he was a patsy or not a patsy. But it's, I don't know, man. It looks like a guy was brought out for a public execution. You know what I'm saying? Again, try not to go down conspiracy theory road.
That,
but that builds the conspiracy theory, right?
It does.
That he's assassinated.
You kill the one guy who has information.
Yeah, you kill Oswald, and now right? Oh, he was killed to shut him up.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah.
and then it just explodes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then was it Castro? Was it the mafia?
No,
was it the
it
Russians?
was Johnson, right?
Yeah,
I've
was
heard
it
once that
Johnson?
President Johnson did it because he
Yeah.
thought Kennedy was going to.
So that is my next
Yeah.
'Cause it
question
was
about the
Vietnam, yeah.
conspiracy theories. And I have one for Cheryl and James, but quite frankly, I think anybody can chime in here. So talk about the conspiracy theories. What?
Do y'all want
what
to
are
jump on
they?
that? It's
Do you want to, Cheryl, you want to
They're
begin?
so
up to you.
Okay, well,
They are
to
numerous.
talk about why we even get conspiracy theories, you
Yeah,
know,
that's a
kind
good
of at
place
the
to start.
heart of that is the idea that by sort of uncovering a truth, a wrong can be righted, right? So there's a whole big body of research that looks at why people even have this tendency to feel the need to come up with conspiracy theories. And from a, psychologist viewpoint, they would look at it's the brain's natural tendency to have a defense against a perceived threat. Or from chaos, we naturally try to make sense and order of it. A sociological perspective is going to be in agreement with that. And it's going to say you have these big social structures like government and other big social structures that make the individual feel powerless. And so which causes vulnerability, right? We feel like we're vulnerable. And so in times of anxiety or stress in our society, we kind of tend toward these conspiracy theories. And it's important to realize that just because society calls something a conspiracy theory or because it falls into that criteria of a conspiracy theory, that doesn't mean it's necessarily false. And so we have just enough conspiracy theories that have eventually been proven true, like Watergate, right, that add fuel to the fire and keep people going, like keep coming up with new conspiracy theories or new takes or new explanations, and it really legitimizes that process. And there can be negative things about that. If you have harmful outcomes from widespread belief in a conspiracy theory, like maybe vaccine conspiracy theories, right? Where then all kinds of people don't get vaccinated and we have a resurgence of some disease that's been pretty much stamped out in the past. So that can be negative, but there's also positive things about conspiracy theories. It almost kind of gives leeway to question government and to question authority, and it in that way kind of forces a level of transparency from our bureaucracies, and they feel like they have to answer questions to the public. So there's good and bad things about that. And I think, around the Kennedy assassination, there are kind of some big themes that emerge in conspiracy theories, and we've touched on some of those just briefly. They tend to be questions about a single shooter. And a lot of that comes from interviews from people that were there that say they either saw or heard shots from the front of the motorcade instead of from behind where Oswald was.
Yeah.
The other kind of big thing is the magic bullet theory, where people say that, could that single weapon, even if fired in that rapid succession, from that angle, could that bullet even have taken that trajectory? And the big thing is, could that single bullet that ended up in pristine form have caused all those wounds that are attributed to it? And again, there's various groups that people attribute this plot to, whether it be Castro or Cuba, the mafia, the U.S. Secret Service, the Russians, Johnson himself. So there are all different ideas about that. It's interesting, though, that over time, this question of the official version and then therefore belief in conspiracy theories seems to kind of be constant. Right? Like, if you think about it, in the U.S., we can't agree on anything, right? Political parties, we don't agree on anything. But if you look, depending on which recent poll you look at, but recent polls show as high as 61% of Americans still believe in some level of conspiracy theories about the Kennedy assassination. It's almost like it's the only thing we can still agree on, which is kind of interesting.
And it's interesting as well, I think a lot of people look at Lee Harvey Oswald and they look at the Kennedy assassination, which is this horrible, tragic thing, and the two don't add up. Like, here's this goofy guy who had these goofy ideas, and he's responsible for this terrible moment that changed American history. So it doesn't seem to add up in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, if I could piggyback off that, I was going to talk about his past, like who was Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's a really sad story, I mean, like he was born in New Orleans. His dad died like 2 months before he was born, so like his mom was raising kids by herself. I mean, raising kids is tough. You know, doing it by yourself, it makes it worse. And by all accounts, his mother was a pretty overbearing woman. His older brother's name was Robert. He was called Robert Jr. His older brother said that, you know, growing up in that house with her, she was just a very tough woman. She was very overbearing in their lives. A lot of instability in that home. Like when he's 5 years old, he moves back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But by the time he's 16 years old, I read that he had lived in 22 different houses and attended 12 different schools by the time he was 16 years old. So that's a lot of instability in that life. He was a very closed and quiet, kind of withdrawn kind of a kid. But like a week before he turned 17, he joined the U.S. Marines. His older brother, Robert, I guess he kind of looked up to him. His older brother, Robert, had been a Marine. So, but to join the Marines at that age, you had to have consent from an adult or a guardian. His mother wouldn't sign the papers. His mother didn't want him to go to the Marine Corps, so his older brother signed for him. So 17, he's a Marine. By all accounts in his training, he was a decent shot. Wouldn't go so far as to say it was a great shot, but I've always told people you can practice with a rifle. You can get better, right? Just because you were not so great in the Marine Corps doesn't mean that, you know, later on you're not good. But anyways, but while he's in the Marines, he showed some aptitude. He showed some intelligence. He was a radar operator of all things. He ran radar for the U.S. Marine Corps. Along the way, though, he ran into some problems. He just had a problem with authority, I think, at the end of the day. At some point, his weapon discharged. He had a .22 pistol that he shot himself with a pistol. He didn't mean to. It just discharged. He got in trouble for that. There was another moment in his Marine career where he challenged an officer, got into a bit of an altercation with an officer, got in trouble for that. So he just kept having these problems while he was in the Marines. But eventually, he gets out of the Marine Corps. And in that, while he was in the Marines, he was studying Russian. Like he had a rudimentary level of speaking Russian, reading Russian and things like that. He had been reading all kinds of socialist and Marxist books. I guess you could call it propaganda, whatever you want to call it, literature on socialism. And in 1959, this guy just decided to defect and leave the United States, and he lived in the Soviet Union for like 2 years. He just gave it all up and decided he wanted to be a communist, and he moved off to the Soviet Union. At first, the Russians were like, okay, this guy is a spy. He's an ex-Marine. There's no way we're letting him in. But I don't know, somehow, some way he convinced them that he really did want to defect. He really did want to join the Soviet Union. So he worked in Minsk. That's a city over in Russia. He worked in an electronics factory in Minsk for a couple of years. Meets and falls in love with Marina, right, who he marries, and they have a kid. And at some point in 1961, he just decides that he's not living the communist dream. It turns out living in the Soviet Union is not all it's cracked up to be. It's a pretty tough life. So in 1961, he's like, yeah, that wasn't a great choice. I want to come back home to the United States. So he contacts the U.S. State Department in Moscow, talks about, I want to come home. And, I've heard people talk about this and watching various documentaries. It was next to impossible for someone to go from the Soviet Union to the United States at that point in time, like height of Cold War, hysteria, paranoia being what it was. So this is a guy who had defected our country and gone over there. He should have been questioned. He should have been made to answer all manner of questions for weeks on end. They should have done a thorough review before they let him in. But it's literally just a case of, hey, I want to come home. Okay, cool. Welcome back to the United States. No questions, no interviews, nothing like that. Just welcome on back. Heck, they even loaned him money to travel back to Dallas-Fort Worth, the State Department did. Comes back to Texas, is in Dallas-Fort Worth for a little bit, but he was having problems in his marriage. He and Marina didn't get along very well. That's putting it lightly. At some point, he goes to New Orleans, gets wrapped up in what was it called? The Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Mm-hmm. They're very pro-Castro, pro-Cuba. So he goes back to New Orleans and gets wrapped up in that mess. So here he is, spouting communist ideas on the street corners of New Orleans, Louisiana. Then comes back to Dallas-Fort Worth. This is a traveler. This is a traveling man for sure. But comes back to Dallas-Fort Worth, and then in the summer of 1963, so this is just months before the assassination, he travels to Mexico City. He goes down south, and what he's doing in Mexico City is he's trying to contact the Cuban embassy, and he's trying to get access to go to Cuba. Now, what a lot of people later would say, and I think the Warren Report came to this conclusion, was the trip to Mexico was his trying to get out of the country. Like, he's thinking, I'm about to kill the President of the United States, I'm going to assassinate him, so I need an exit strategy. So maybe he went to Mexico City to set up an exit strategy to get out of, to go to Cuba, right? But my question is, how do you know you're going to pull that off? I don't think the parade route for the president had been established yet at that point. We're talking like 2 months before the assassination takes place. So I don't buy that idea that, you know, he was going to kill the president and then his exit strategy was to go to Cuba. I think he just wanted to go to Cuba. I think this is a traveling guy who wanted to, I think he wanted to experience another type of communism that wasn't Soviet Union style, but was more in Cuba, you know.
Well, and the weather's better.
Yeah, the weather's so much better, right, down in Cuba.
Than that.
So he is a strange guy.
Yeah.
And I think for the American people, it's, how can this lone nut take out the most powerful man on earth? You know, like we as a country needed more than just this one crazy dude pulled the trigger and now our president's dead. We needed something more than that, I think, is what fuels a lot of...
Wasn't acceptable.
Yeah, that's just not acceptable. We needed something bigger than that. We needed Castro was involved, or the Soviet Union is involved, or, yeah, something like that.
And I do want to leave time for questions. I know that you probably have burning questions. I want to get to those. So my last question for our panel is this, and Leigh-Anne, I'm going to direct it towards you. How is JFK remembered today, and what impact does his assassination have on our historical memory of him?
So a leading historian writes in a book that the most important thing about Kennedy was, right, he became more important the day he died. He was more important dead than alive.
That's true.
I think that Kennedy was American aspiration in post-war America, 1960. He's young, his wife is young, he's got little kids, he's like every embodiment of the growth and prosperity and opportunity that awaits us at some point. And his presidency was really actually very mediocre. He was...
Yeah, the Bay of Pigs was a disaster.
Yeah, he's just kind of ho-hum, right? The Bay of Pigs, where he gives tacit agreement to assassinate Castro. He, kind of bowls up against, the Soviets during the Cuban Missile Crisis and plays a big game of chicken. But what most people don't realize is that Khrushchev knows that the Americans have way more military nuclear weapons than the Soviets have, and he can't win. So he gives in, right? And Kennedy, kind of behind the scenes, they agree to remove some missiles that were in Turkey, but we're giving this to the Red. Yeah. They were already going to pull those out. They didn't really give him anything, but he was
criticized for that.
And he was, And so we mythologized him because the leading historical biography of him says Kennedy was an unfinished life. And we think about Kennedy, mythologize him, martyred, right? He certainly became a martyr, and kind of give him credit for a lot of things that he didn't really do, right? He starts some things with regards to the civil rights movement, but he's very lukewarm
he was extremely
on that,
lukewarm.
right? He's not, not that he personally isn't a proponent of that,
right.
And he gets warmer as his presidency goes on, but he was a realist in the sense of he knew what he couldn't get through Congress, and he kind of had planned the civil rights movement for his second term, right? And so he never got that opportunity because of being in Dallas. And
So
yeah.
what about the idea, because when Johnson does become president, he
Yeah.
takes over after Kennedy is assassinated, and uses the Kennedy legacy very openly
Oh, yes.
to get a lot of things through Congress. So in what way do you think Johnson helped to shape Kennedy's legacy?
Oh, absolutely, because Johnson wants a legacy. Presidents want a legacy. Johnson wants a legacy. He sees an opportunity for that. He was one of the most shrewd politicians who ever sat in the White House. And he plays on the grief of the country and the legacy of Kennedy, the memorial of Kennedy.
Yeah.
We should do this in memory of him, in honor of him, right?
Yeah, civil rights and the space race.
Yeah, it was right.
Yeah.
They can't be seen as so heartless in Congress, and sure we'll do this. Kennedy gets a lot of credit for some of the things Johnson gets a lot of credit for some of the things that Kennedy starts, right? Although Kennedy starts that, again, shrewd politician. He realizes that he needs to have the support of various groups in order to get reelected and to get things done. And so, yeah, absolutely, Johnson capitalizes on that. And takes that, and then gets mired in, right, Johnson's biggest issue was the Vietnam War, and kind of gets mired in that. And kind of goes to one of the conspiracy theories that I always heard about, even as a younger kid. Johnson was responsible for killing Kennedy because Kennedy was going to pull out, right, early on in the Vietnam War, he was going to pull out all of the advisors in Vietnam, and Johnson's wife's family was in control of Bell Helicopter, I think is what it was, right? Yeah. And so it was the military-industrial complex was, right, responsible for Kennedy's assassination. I mean, it goes, right, it kind of goes.
It's one of them, yeah. So. I mean, there's no doubt that after Kennedy's assassinated, Johnson becomes president. Our involvement in Vietnam did go up drastically at that point. But that could just be a president with a different idea.
It could, absolutely.
It doesn't have to be a conspiracy theory.
Exactly right, yeah. But it all feeds those things, right?
Yeah.
And because we don't know, it's easy to supplant what we think is going to be the narrative that supports whatever conclusion we want to draw.
Right.
Not just the Warren Commission, but ourselves as well, right? Kind of collectively. And so certainly I think the historical memory of him is that he was Lincoln-esque. People often compare him to Lincoln. Yeah. And we often mythologize Lincoln. That's a whole other panel, right?
Yeah.
A president who wins the presidency with a mere 39% of the popular vote. So there are some, but yeah. Martyr.
Any last thoughts on Kennedy? Do we want to definitively answer who killed John F. Kennedy?
No, I can't do that.
You're not going to give us any wisdom.
No,
Too bad.
I do not have an answer for that. I'll go with the Warren Commission.
At least we know, I think I could say that Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible.
He was a player, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know that he was the only one responsible.
Yeah.
I think that,
I think that's true.
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you to our panel. And now I'm going to get my exercise. Any questions that you may have? Knew I was going to have somebody. Brave first person.
Harvey's throwing me a bone. Or something.
So, I was curious about, I have quite a few questions, but I'll just pick a couple. So, whenever you guys were talking about how there was multiple shots heard, whenever, from all the witnesses, do you think that might have had to do with, the fact that the buildings, kind of echoed
like
the
an
sound?
echo chamber?
Yeah, you hear that.
It could. Yeah, absolutely, that could.
Or that the acoustics were funny, and so it sounded like it was coming from here, and
like I said, it kind of depended on
the the area kind of bounced off.
Yeah, it kind of depended on where you were standing that day.
Right.
People close to the grassy knoll, it was back here. Hugh Ainsworth, journalist who was there, the 6 floors up above him, he swears that came from up there in that window. So you're probably right. That probably does have a lot to play with it as well.
And I hear this a lot. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but in like the video where like you see him getting shot and then like you see his wife kind of crawling from behind.
Yeah.
A lot of people believe that she was actually trying to grab part of his brain. That was shot. That's true?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I've heard a lot of people debate being like, no, it was because she was trying to escape. But then there are people who were like, no, it's because of the brain. That's kind of smart thinking on her part, though, to think like automatically just to grab.
Yeah,
because
that's a weird thing,
I think
isn't
I
it?
would be freaking out.
I think it would be too. Yeah. Is it also true? I'm sorry. This always my mind is full of weird factoids. I've always heard that what she was wearing that day is in a museum somewhere in Maryland. And they didn't even bother to clean off the blood. Like, they just kind of left it the way it was as a historical thing.
heard that too.
Yeah.
She refused to change her clothes. Like, somebody brought her clothes to change into at Parkland, and she refused. She stayed in that bloody suit. And
On purpose.
I think she was even wearing it when they swore Johnson in on the plane.
She was.
So she
And that
said
she
very
had brain matter that she
Yeah.
gave to the doctors at Parkland.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
said very specifically, I want people to see what they've done to my husband.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it was very specific
But
on her
as
part
far
that she
as
stayed in that suit.
the suit goes, so the family has it.
Okay.
And they're not going to release it until well after
Right.
we're dead.
Yeah.
So
And like
they're
a
not
lot of the
going to
photographs that
let
day, they're black
go
and
public.
white, right? We didn't have a lot of color photography at the time. So it's very hard to tell, first of all, that it's a pink dress in those black and white photographs. But secondly, you have to really look hard, but you can kind of see that it's splattered with something.
Yeah.
And obviously, sadly, it's the president's blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all over that dress.
So when the limousine, to answer your question about grabbing, when the limousine gets to Parkland Hospital, there was a senator, a Texas Senator, Ralph Yarborough, who was in the car with Johnson, who gets out of the car to come up to the limousine with Kennedy. And he says that she's there with her husband, like laying across her. But it's Connolly, I think, who says that he hears Jackie saying, "My God, I've got his brains in my hand." So yeah, she was definitely traumatized. I don't know that any of us could guess how we would react in that moment,
Right.
Yeah,
but
I hate to think
definitely
about
traumatized.
And then they lose the brains.
it. Yeah, it's lost.
Yeah, we've lost the brain. How do you lose a brain?
Yeah.
But how do you lose the brain of the
Yeah.
President of the United States? Is kind of
There was in the new documentary that came out yesterday that interviews the doctors from Parkland, one of them said they were remarking on how put together she seemed. Like, yes, she was upset, she was clearly in shock, but she wasn't hysterical, she wasn't sobbing in the corner, she was standing looking, very attentive to make sure things were being done. And he said he, like oddly in his own head, noted that she's wearing a pink dress. Why did she choose red gloves with that? And then realized just a few minutes later, those aren't gloves, that's the blood of the president on her hand. And so that was just an interesting quote from a surgeon that was there.
Goodness.
Anyone else? Great questions.
Those were good questions. Uh-oh. This is a historian about to ask a question here. Phil,
Hi, everybody. That's not a question.
Okay.
This is a nerd out moment.
Okay.
The comment about losing the brain.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was very, can everybody hear me? I always thought it was very interesting that he's rushed to Parkland where they perform life-saving measures on him. And
A guy who has no brain.
We talked about the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
And in my classes, I'm like, well, what life are you saving at this point?
Yes.
But you mentioned the hole here that was recently
Yeah.
reassessed.
Yeah.
They did a trach there, didn't they?
Yes.
So I don't know, how does that throw that off for
I'm
them
not
going
sure
back
either.
and
That autopsy, I remember this, under Texas law, that body has to stay there in that hospital for, I think it's a set number of hours. It's like, I think 2 or 3 days. You're supposed to keep it there and perform an autopsy, and it can't be released for like X amount of hours. But as soon as that autopsy in Parkland was done, the Secret Service, they pushed the doctors and said, we're gone. And they get the casket on Air Force One, they get it up and rolling, they get it back to Washington, D.C. as quick as they can, where you have military pathologists conduct their own autopsy, and somewhere in the middle of all that, they lost the president's brain. And like, okay, so if he got hit from behind, why do we keep going down conspiracy theory road? If he got hit from behind, that would show up in an autopsy, right? Like there would be a bullet marked through the back of the brain to the front of the brain. And like, okay, it could have hit in the back, come forward and exploded right here, thus throwing his head back that way. But it'd be nice if we could check the brain and look for bullets in the back that maybe did that. But you destroy the evidence, you don't have the ability to check that, so. Yeah, and I'm sorry, you look at the Zapruder film, that man was shot from the front, it hit here, it exploded, and he went flying back like this. I don't see how something hitting you from behind, first of all, you got hit from behind, your head would go this way.
Forward, yeah.
It would not go this way. So he's holding his throat, he's leaned forward holding his throat, and bam, his head just goes flying back from that force. I'm sorry, if he's holding his head or his throat and he's hit back here, he's going forward into the seat in front of him. That's my personal opinion. I'm not a pathologist, by the way, so.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because neither were any of the people who sat on the Warren Commission.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and that does not help.
A lot of them were politicians.
Yeah.
And wasn't it, and I just heard, Connolly passes away not all that many moons ago. I mean, it's within the last, 10, 15
I think you're right, yeah.
years. And supposedly, there was a bullet fragment in his wrist. And they wanted to do some autopsy,
Right.
and his family would not let them do that. So they could have had some other answers, but yeah.
Because if that's true, there's not a pristine
Right,
lone
exactly.
bullet. Because it did go through his wrist,
Exactly.
according to the,
And so neither of the families, neither the Kennedy family nor the Connolly family have ever allowed anything to come out that would contradict the Warren report.
Mm.
Audrey has-
Oh, she's got another one over here.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry. You guys were talking, and I realized that there was a video that was like a couple months ago by this person called Lemino, Lemmino, and they talk about specifically the book depository and how, mostly about like the witness accounts and like what they all saw and how witness accounts aren't always very accurate. But apparently there was people that were under where Oswald supposedly shot on the 5th floor, and those were the people that he was working with. But like you guys said before, that he was like, people saw him walking out.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder like how like he wasn't like stopped by them if there was
Right.
people underneath, and how he was able to even sneak the gun in.
Yeah.
I don't know.
If you just shot the President of the United States, you're not calm, you're not collected. You are nervous as all get out. You are looking for, how do I get out of here quickly? How do I run away? You don't just very calmly walk down the stairs, and people see you walking calmly down the stairs, walking out in the street, calm, walking on down the street. That's not someone who's just shot the President of the United States. I'm sorry.
And Dallas police officers who questioned him also
Yeah.
noticed his calmness and
Yeah.
noted that, that he was very calm, collected, was not acting in any way nervous or agitated.
Yeah.
Which
There were
also
also
feeds the conspiracy, right?
Right.
There are also
right.
reports that right before the shooting would have occurred, he was hanging out in the break room, having a Coke or whatever, not a nervous wreck up there setting up for, so yeah.
Yeah. Not getting ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, goodness. Okay.
Oh, Margaret.
Yeah, so my question mostly has to do with like the post JFK era that you mentioned. I guess my question would be, how has the event of Kennedy being assassinated, as well as Robert Kennedy, kind of shaped the way we view the Kennedy family as a whole in the public?
Yeah, plus the death of his son, right, who died in that airplane crash?
Yeah.
Yeah, off the coast. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's a legacy of sadness. It's like a cursed family or something like that, you know. And in the 60s, you also had Dr. King, you had Malcolm X. It just seemed like in the 60s, whenever anyone had something to say and they stood up, they were silenced, right? So, yeah, it's a lot of assassinations, not just the one we're talking about here today. So.
I certainly think it mythologized the family, right?
Yeah.
And their kind of their quest.
And Teddy Kennedy was a senator forever and a day.
Teddy Kennedy was
Yeah.
senator. I remember Teddy Kennedy
Yeah, I
for a long
remember
time.
that. Mhm.
And now, right, bringing it full circle, RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy's son, JFK's nephew, is running
Yeah, he is.
for president as an independent candidate.
Yep.
Many people believe that the coming election is going to be very reminiscent of '92, that RFK
yeah,
will
yeah.
pull from both parties and be a big spoiler. We just don't know to which party it will be most detrimental.
Right.
So, yeah. We'll see.
I hate to be that guy,
Mike-
but I have a class at 2 o'clock.
Okay, my question, well, it's not really a question. I was watching the Disney Hulu special they had, and during the press conference, they were questioning Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah.
And they asked, what are you being charged for? And at the time, he said, I'm only being charged for shooting the police officer.
Yeah.
And one of the news reporters for the Dallas area, so, no, you're being accused and being charged for shooting the president. And the look on Harvey Oswald's face, he was very shocked. He had no idea that this was happening. So what's your thought on that?
I mean, he said he was a patsy, right? He just, I'm a patsy. Yeah, I don't know what to say to that. Yeah. But you're right. I remember seeing that. I remember seeing the look on his face. It took a turn. He had an emotional reaction to that. Yeah. Maybe that's the realization of, wow, I'm in deeper than I thought I was.
I'm toast.
Yeah, I'm toast.
All right, so we are running up against time, so maybe one more question. Anybody want to go last? Oh.
It's another statement.
Okay.
As she's walking, my students make sure you sign the sign-in sheet that's been running around.
Yes.
Well, I guess it kind of is a question. So we talked about the before and after, how that being a turning point, right? For Dallas specifically, afterward, it is painted in a very, this is Dallas, we get along, it's great, we love each other. Prior to Kennedy's assassination, wasn't Dallas a hotbed of not just conservatism, but far right-wing little pockets of extremism, right? Okay, that's something that kind of gets washed over a lot, but...
Yeah, like Sara said, they had those flyers going around calling him a traitor. Yeah.
Dallas kind of led the way for the other.
Yeah, and how sad that is that he had to come down here to kind of get those extremist conservative Democrats who, they're supposed to be his supporters, right? They're supposed to be part of his base, but he has to come to Texas to say, hey, vote for me, look, I'm the leader of the Democratic Party, and you guys are going a little far off there, but yeah, let's reel that back in. Yeah. So I have to teach at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
I gotta go.
All right. So thank you all for coming. If you have not yet done so, please do the QR code before you leave. Also, grab some more pizza, grab some water, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.